we doing, guys?
Hello, Mitch. Good to see you again.
Hey, Mitch.
How's it going, guys?
Hey, Mitch, how you doing?
Doing well, guys.
I'm doing
Good to
great.
see everyone. Good. Can everyone see me okay? Hear me okay? All those.
You're in your car for this meeting.
I am. I'm actually down in Texas, and both of my kiddos are a bit loud.
Okay. Are they there?
How's it
How's the
going, man?
weather?
It is.
Good. How are you?
Let's see. I'm doing excellent. It's 81 degrees, so right now it's better than Iowa, I would say.
Just barely. We're 72 today, 72 and sunny, so no
Wow.
complaints over here.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yes, sir.
We're going on. I think we're going on 2 weeks down here. I don't know. With all the COVID stuff, I might just stay down here for a bit.
That's what I hear. I hear Austin, Texas is the place to go. Where are you at?
So we're in Waco today. We were in Georgetown yesterday and for the last handful. So we're right around that Austin area.
Cool.
And is this just
What's
a
the
vacation
vibe
down
like
there?
down there?
We are just down here for traveling, trying to potentially find a warm weather getaway.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah, vibe as far as the COVID stuff goes. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
just everything.
It's kind of interesting down here. So everyone masks up in public, but there's not a whole lot of care outside of that. Everyone else is pretty much rebellious, but everyone very much minds the mask or don't go out thing. But there's still a lot of activities, not a lot of stuff shut down.
Businesses are open down there. Everything's open.
Pretty much, yeah. We haven't run across anything that's really closed, other than things that are like officially shut down, like that aren't coming back. There are quite a few of those down here.
Okay. Like restaurants and bars, are those open too, or not really?
Yep, restaurants are. I had lunch at a Euro place, late dinner, about half hour, 45 minutes ago. So
Okay. That's good. That's good to know.
yeah, we were in San Antonio a few days ago, about a week now. Wow, time flies. And the whole river walk was still open through San Antonio, all the bars, that kind of stuff.
Drive or fly?
We drove, so I got our 3-year-old and our 1-year-old are with us. So it's Jess and I, as well as our 2 kiddos. We drove all the way down here, so we've been all the way down to South Padre, and now we're working our way back north.
Wow. I don't blame you for not coming back if you don't.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. How's it going, Brad?
Buddy, how are you?
I'm doing well, brother. Doing well.
Glad to hear.
Jose, I see you on here too. I'm on my phone, so if you guys see me swiping, that's why.
Hey, what's up?
Not much, man. Staying warm,
Yeah,
healthy, all those things.
all of them, all of the above.
Good. Think Sam's joining us. I saw her pop on. There she is. Cool. She's got a market update for us tonight.
I
Whenever
do.
you're ready, Sam.
I was having some computer technical difficulties, but I'm glad I was able to make it.
Nice. Welcome to the party. Our book club last week was riddled with them. My phone froze like 3 times and then it overheated and just wouldn't stay on. So
Oh, cool. Technology is great when it works.
yeah.
Okay, guys, I will jump right in. Some pretty exciting numbers. So our total number of active listings in October is 4,889. Again, this is in the entire Des Moines area MLS. Our average days to sell for October actually decreased from last month and the month before. So when we started out the year, we were hovering in the 70s to 60 day range. And now we're actually down to 42 days. So we're getting things closed a lot more quickly, which is good news. Good news. Total number of sales in October was a slight jump from last month. We had 1,583. Last month we had 1,505. So a slight increase there.
That's good.
It
So things are
is.
still popping off. Things are still coming off market and going on market.
Yes. At a pretty decent rate. Kind of what we've been talking about all along is while COVID is affecting us, it is not affecting the real estate world. So those of us in real estate, we like it. We like it a lot. Total number of new listings for October is 1,756, which is almost a 100 property increase from last month. So definitely like that. Slight dip from June and July, but pretty much to be expected once we hit that fall season. And then last item, which I'm really excited to see, is the average sales price for October jumped back up, and now we are averaging house sales to be right around $255,015, which last month we were at $251,000. So
Nice.
we increased by about 4. So that's good news too.
Sweet. That's all good. It'll be interesting to see what Q4 does this year. Historically, it usually things slow down. We see an inventory decrease. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in November and in December, especially with all the politics going on. So
For sure. Yeah.
what's
Politics.
your general feel, Sam, on traditional side right now?
Things are still moving. Something that I definitely noticed with working traditional buyers, those houses under 175 are still selling in hours. And it's all about positioning. So when you have a great property and you price it appropriately, and again, this is on the more traditional side, not so much investment properties. But when it's priced appropriately, it moves rather quickly. And boy, you can surely tell when you're overpriced and your house is kind of hanging out there for a while. So long story short, price your house where the market says and not where you wish the market said.
Yep. Yeah. What about on the investment side? How's that feeling both on acquisition and dispo?
Investment side on acquisition, I'm pretty impressed. I thought we would have a slight dip coming into Thanksgiving, but we're still going on a fairly large number of appointments and locking down contracts. So that's definitely good. On the disposition side, if I compared it to last year, it's, not quite as strong. I think folks are maybe holding a little longer than they wanted to, or because of COVID, their materials aren't getting there as quickly. So they're not jamming out as many properties as maybe they were last year.
That all makes sense. Yeah, I know we've had a pretty solid week. Do you want to share how many acquisitions we've got under contract this week?
Sure. I have 2 officially locked down with folks that have signed, and I just received another verbal. The one that I received a verbal on is 2 brothers. So the one brother that's the majority owner has agreed, and we're just waiting for the other brother to feel like he said yes. and then it was his idea. So
Nice. So we're up to 2 for sure, and then a third probably acquisition this week.
absolutely.
Very cool. That's awesome. Okay. Yeah. And I know from Dispo side, things have sat a little bit longer. Part of that's us trying to play with market a little bit and see what happens. And I'll echo what Sam said. It definitely feels like investors are playing a little closer to chest as a whole. Obviously, there's a lot of folks still out there playing and buying. But as a whole, it does feel like most folks are playing a little tighter and looking for those bigger margins right now. So, yeah.
Yep, and
Awesome,
the
guys.
guys that I would kind of consider inner circle that typically purchase quite a few properties every year, they're still definitely, purchasing a decent amount. But like I said, with the shortage of materials or the time that it takes to get those special orders has definitely slowed them down. Not by their own choosing, but it's kind of the name of the game right now.
You can only have a couple projects open. You can only have a couple projects open. You gotta let them get done. That makes a ton of sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for the update, Sam. Anyone have questions for Sam?
Do you think that has to do at all with inventory and opportunity out there of why the buy side is maybe down a little bit on the investor side?
I definitely don't think there's any shortage of opportunity. I really just think that it's, like I just mentioned, folks just can't get the materials as quickly. And they do their best to plan ahead, but when you have windows that aren't typical standard sizes and you're dealing with these older homes that are needing custom windows, it's taking longer with derecho and the shortage on lumber and shingles. That has also caused a bit of hiccup in people's timelines. And then not to mention, we had quite a few hurricanes in the South that also matched up at the same time that we had our Midwest hurricane.
Yeah. Those lumber prices, I know we just did 3/4 inch plywood and it was 4 times more for the roof we just put on in plywood, and same thing with studs and everything else. So the other takeaway here is I think people are playing closer to the chest, waiting on those commodities to come down a little bit because we're so high on lumber prices right now. I mean, if we didn't have as many projects as we had going, I'd probably just focus on the finishy ones and not the rough-in ones to see what comes in Q1 on those commodity prices. With lumber being as much as it is, I mean, we're paying literally 4 times for material right now. So you're talking $1,000 up to $4,000. That's a lot of price swing. You can sit on a project for a pretty long time waiting for that. And that's if you can get them.
Right. That seems to be what I'm hearing ringing mostly in buyers and flippers and rehabbers. Even if they're not flipping the house for resale, they're doing a value add on their rental. They literally just can't move as quickly as they would like to. Because they don't have the material they need.
You think lumber is 4 times its normal cost? Is that what you said?
I promise you it is. So a 2x4 is 4 times what it was
Really?
4 or 5 months ago. Yeah.
Wow.
You're $8 to $9 for a 2x4 pre-cut right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Any
3/4
thoughts on why that
OSB.
might be? Is it just a lot of properties being worked on, or is there just a shortage of materials or something else?
So some of the groups that I follow and the reports that I'm reading, it has to do, from my understanding, with the Canadian border issues, as well as the overall demand. So we're not getting as much from Canada as we were. And we also have a higher demand right now going on. So forecast, if you look at the Home Builders Association, they're saying they quoted the average price increase of $8,000, but those stats were only through end of August, and we've seen a higher spike since there. So they're saying $8,000 up for lumber costs from last year for a whole house build. I think if they were to report that study right now, it would be substantially higher than that. It doesn't quantify quite as well. I can tell you from the local side, though, it's almost 4 times for some of your more common pieces.
Wow.
Yeah. Again, that's trade issues as well as demand issues, I think.
Man issues. There's a lot of activity going on, so people are buying up all the stuff.
Yep.
So to speak.
Yeah, we bought a couple truckloads of shingles on the front end of the ratio to lock in pricings. We got a notice that pricing was going to go up on that. That hasn't spiked nearly as much as we expected it to, but it was still I think we saved almost 20% by locking in the shipments when we did.
Okay. Wow. Wow. Thanks for the info.
Yeah, of course. And just so everyone knows, from a general perspective, we're moving toward warehousing of materials to help with the supply chain. So one of our long-term goals is to have a warehouse. Not long-term, it's rather short at this point, is to have a warehouse of all of our finished materials to stop the interruptions. So if you guys have the capital, that's definitely something to look into. Cool. Well, thanks, Sam. Any other questions for Sam, market related right now? We've got Ben and Brad back. I think it's been about 6 months since we talked to you guys. We talked on the front end of COVID when all the initial pieces were rolling out. No one was really sure. So I wanted to get an update from you guys and really touch base on what you've seen in the market as far as the rental world goes, as well as what we think is going to be policy moving forward. So if you guys would you reintroduce yourselves briefly? Ben, if you would go first.
You say Ben?
Yep, if that's okay.
Absolutely, you bet. Yeah, so RPM Iowa is the company that I run, and we specialize in executive single-family homes, typically between that $1,500 to $3,000 mark. A lot of new construction conversation, so all the stuff you're talking is, it's relevant across the board, even if you're talking volume stuff on new construction, it's echoing the same thing. So anyway, we focused on a little bit different type of investor, looking at the market a little bit differently. Not as much on the value add side. Takes a specialized group like you guys to be able to kick enough tires to find those opportunities, and we've just taken a different approach. And so for us, our rent collection, do you want me to dive into rent collection or just the intro and then ask questions from there?
Just a quick intro, if you would, brother. I want to give Brad a good opportunity too.
We manage about 500 or so properties on the executive level, and don't do any apartments or anything like that. So pretty niche in what we do.
Perfect.
Creating wealth through real estate. You bet.
Perfect. Brad, would you mind introducing yourself, brother?
My pleasure, buddy. Thank you again, Mitch, for having Ben and I on. I certainly enjoyed it the last time, and looking forward to this one also. My name's Brad Neal. I own Renters Warehouse, Iowa, here in Des Moines. Our office is located in Urbandale. We manage residential rental properties, let's say single-family rentals up to small multifamily. So get into that maybe 12 to 20 units in one location type of property. Basically, I'd say within about 30 minutes of the metro is probably the area that we service most closely. We've got a couple pockets a little farther out where we've got a number of properties, so it's made sense to bring some of those on. Yeah, been doing this for 6 years now. Formerly an attorney here in the state of Iowa for 10 years or 11 years prior to that. And I started this company about 6 years ago. We manage 850 units in Des Moines area. I would say 650 of those are single family rentals in Des Moines or like duplex, which I consider more similar with single family than I would small multifamily. So
Nice, brother. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. Since I let Ben introduce first, Brad, I'll throw the first question at you. From the legal side, what have you seen swap in or out since beginning of COVID that has you concerned? Anything?
Yeah, moratoriums, man. My least favorite word right now, but it actually hasn't been as bad as I thought. The first moratorium was for the first few months of COVID, and then on the heels of that, of us being able to actually start the eviction process. After that, we had to give a 30-day notice at the beginning of August for anybody who hadn't paid rent during the first moratorium. Once that 30-day notice expired at the very beginning of September, a new moratorium went into place for the balance of the year. Different terms on that moratorium. But yeah, so we've been battling that a little bit. We don't tend to evict a lot of people. Of course, COVID has made it a little more of a rent paying, a little more of an issue. So we've been dealing with that. And, you know, in Polk County, for example, Mitch, I don't know if you've done any evictions or your team has here in the last couple months, but Iowa Legal Aid is now basically open an office at the Polk County Small Claims Court, and they talk with every single person who's in there for a forcible entry and detainer action, which is a little bit frustrating also. So, but we've been able to navigate it pretty well. It hasn't been as ugly as I thought. Hasn't been nearly as ugly as, I don't remember if it was April or May when we last convened. Hasn't been as bad as I thought it was going to be then. And that shows in rent collection, which I'm sure we'll get to, and things like that. But from a legal standpoint, I would say that's the big one. People turning in those CDC declarations now and thinking that they're bulletproof, and us trying to educate them a little differently in that respect. So.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Ben, have you seen anything different? I mean, obviously the law is the law, but what are you seeing overall? And does anything have you concerned?
No, I would echo most of what Brad's saying there about it hasn't been nearly as bad as we anticipate. We have typically in a month, we have about 5% of our total occupants that don't pay on time in that first 5-day grace period that we give them. And we've seen that increase to about 15%, but we're still at about just a hair over 99% collection for the month. So by the end of the month, it seems to be, we end up getting most of the rent. It's just a lot harder to get to it. Proactive communication, you know, is the number one combatants of those dang moratoriums. And the affidavit, the most recent one to come out, like Brad said, people think it's bulletproof. And then it's an interesting battle out there right now. The original CARES Act one, we haven't had to deal with that yet. The one that's still relevant to like FHA and VA federal back loans. We've just had the affidavit come into play a few times here in the last probably 3 weeks. Still moving forward, because if they don't know the rules, you just got to keep pressing forward and make sure that you're, you know, fighting for your owners and seeing what happens when we get our day in court, if that day ever comes.
Are you guys getting court dates? Have you noticed any delays in Polk or Warren or Dallas, any of those areas?
No, we work a lot in Dallas, and they're friggin' right on it. Polk's just Polk, you know, so it's always a little bit more challenging to navigate because their quantity is so much higher. But no, we haven't had much issue.
Okay, awesome.
I see
That's
Brad nodding, so I think he's agreeing.
Brad, anything to add there?
We're having no issue in any of the counties that we service getting court dates. Rulings tend to take maybe a touch longer than they have in the past. But no issue whatsoever. I think I counted them up. I've been to court 14 times since the beginning of April. Probably 5 of those have resolved with a payment at the time. Prior to hearing, just getting that resolved. And then the other 9, we placed new tenants. So
nice. Okay. Ben, any difference on actual attendance to court? Well, it's always curious
Yeah.
to hear ratios.
We've only done about 6 where we've actually had court dates. I think we've only had 1 that showed up in Dallas County, and it was a pretty quick win. The other 5 didn't show up, so we just ended up judgment was passed.
Default.
So those were pretty easy.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. And we've heard, obviously, I don't proclaim that you guys are experts on the foreclosure side, but we've seen quite a few foreclosures go through, or we've been party to a handful of foreclosure actions wherein we've got visibility from that brokerage side. And those have all gone pretty smoothly over the last few months. Any opinions on the foreclosure side, guys?
I don't personally deal in that too much. The only time we touch into foreclosures, Mitch, is on a personal acquisition side, or when, like yourself or clients of yours are acquiring that property, and we get involved at the tail end to figure out when they're going to take possession and when we can start getting involved for the management side, getting rental certificates, things of that sort. So, but I'm with you. The point now is people still have to avail themselves of the law. And while the declaration has made it a little easier to do that, I mean, it's publicly and widely available. And like I said, legal aid is in Polk County on a daily basis, intercepting everybody that I can't get to first to get them to sign something. They still have to avail themselves of it, and not everybody's, kind of like what Ben was discussing as well. They're not necessarily, they know it's out there. They don't do anything about it necessarily. So
That makes sense. Okay.
Hey,
Cool.
Brad, for those of us who aren't familiar with all the legal terms, what does it mean to avail themselves?
yeah, so basically what I'm saying is there's a CDC declaration out there that basically has just a couple points, and they don't even have to create the document or anything. It's readily available. If they just Google CDC declaration, they can print it off and sign it. And what I mean by them availing themselves is simply knowing that it exists, finding it and printing it off, signing it, and getting it to my office, to Ben's office, whatever the case may be, to their landlord, their property manager, et cetera. So just basically by availing themselves, taking advantage of the law that is arguably there to protect.
And then making sure, to piggyback off what Brad's saying, is making sure that they understand it in its entirety too, because like the most recent affidavit, technically, if it's boyfriend, girlfriend scenario, and one of them submits the affidavit to you and claims that they've tried the 4 or exhausted the 4 resources that they have to say that they have. Well, if the boyfriend hasn't, then you file the 3-day on the boyfriend and keep pressing forward. Even if you can only evict one party, you just get your day in court so you can have the opportunity to figure something out with them.
Okay, so you mean they have to respond to the eviction process?
Yeah, great question. So the affidavit that we're referencing and what Brad is referencing is the document that anybody can go and get, and they can do that before an eviction's filed, or they can do it at any point, to my understanding, at any point through the eviction process. So if you file a 3-day because they haven't paid, and then you file the FED, and all of a sudden they figure out their nephew's boyfriend's sister told them about this affidavit, and they print it off and they make this claim, the court has the right to stop any proceedings in its tracks. And we had it happen. So this came out on, I think it was like September 30th or 28th or something like that. And we had already won everything, and the case got dropped. I mean, it was like that day, because the problem we ran into was most of the clerks didn't understand the rules, and which nobody really did yet. But so anyway, this affidavit, they have to go and find it. We don't send it to them. We don't give them an opportunity to find it. If they discover it, that's their prerogative to go and find. But if they do submit it to us, we have an obligation that we have to, well, the court has the obligation that it has to cease the eviction, or at least it gives them the opportunity to, because I think they still have to, again, we haven't had this in person yet. But from my understanding, they have to, the judge will question them to ensure that they've exhausted the best efforts to get government assistance, earned less than 99,000 or whatever the number is for their household income. They're unable to make full rent payments or partial payments in some agreement that you have with them. And then partial payments. So there's some gray area in there. Like it says something about partial payments, like they're making an exhausted effort to make partial payments. Well, who gets to decide that? So the judge ultimately gets to decide that, and then they choose to either press forward or call them out and say, nope, that's full of BS and you're out. And I'm not the attorney in this group, so Brad's the one to confirm any of this.
Yeah, and that's all accurate what Ben said. What I would say is we're not the most tenant-friendly state in the United States. However, if you sit on our collective side of things, you certainly feel like we are a tenant-friendly state. And so I would tell you that my concern when the CDC declaration came out was that the clerks and everybody just be handing them out, you know, like candy at Halloween if it weren't during a pandemic. And so what's been happening, that hasn't happened, but that's why I was bringing up kind of made the comment about legal aid has been at Polk County. And I'm not kidding. They took an entire unfinished courtroom and they just posted up, and they're intercepting every defendant in an FED hearing and basically saying, does this have anything to do with payment of rent? If it does, come in here, we'll have you sign a declaration and we'll get this whole thing stopped. And so I would tell you that the judge, and in my experience, the judge is going to run through that exercise that Ben was discussing. However, it's going to be in a very tenant-friendly manner. And what I mean by that is if the tenant basically testifies that they meet the qualifications to qualify for the protections of the CDC eviction moratorium, if they meet those kind of very low threshold standards, and all they really have to do is testify that they do, unless we can prove differently, they're going to get it. They're going to get the protection of that eviction moratorium. So what does it mean? It means it's time to get a little more artful in the way that you take on those evictions and maybe negotiate with tenants, maybe not let it get to the courthouse, things like that. Just trying to figure out other ways to best advocate for our clients, for the integrity of the property, and actually turning it into a revenue generating asset again. So
I'll turn to that. And just to clarify, so these evictions that you're talking about, and like you just said, they're for rent deficiencies. So that's where we're seeing the issues at. That's where the moratorium's on, is if we're evicting for rent or non-payment of rent type issues. Other things like violent
month lease?
Multiple 7-day notices if they're breaching, if it's not a non-payment breach, and you've followed the appropriate notice procedure and given time to cure and hit all the legal prerequisites there, those are still fair game. I would tell you that notice of non-renewal and eviction for failure to vacate at the expiration of, let's say somebody's on a month-to-month lease, you give them this. I'll back it up a little bit so it's a little more applicable. Let's say that they're month-to-month and you give them notice in September that their lease is going to expire on October 31st. If they're still there on November 1st, now you're evicting them under Chapter 648, which is a different provision, and so you've got you're able to at least present to the court that this is not a non-payment issue, that this is a failure to vacate issue at the expiration of a lease. So
that makes sense. So even the month-to-months, is there any best practice? Should we be serving a notice that says, hey guys, month is coming up or lease is coming up as expiration? What's the recommendation there?
Yeah, so right now it's a little bit peculiar because if you gave a 30-day notice of not, if you have a month-to-month tenant right now and you give a 30-day notice of non-renewal today or tomorrow or whatever before the end of this month, your notice for the expiration of their month-to-month tenancy is going to be the same current scheduled expiration of this moratorium. That's why in my example, I backed it up into like September. But there is the possibility. I mean, in fact, I think the original legislation that came out on September 4th with regard to the CDC moratorium kind of left the door open for that moratorium to be extended. And so it's certainly possible that it would be probably one of the last days of this calendar year, and we might all of a sudden find out that the CDC moratorium is going to extend for, who knows, the first quarter of 2021. They may not touch it, and we find out that it expires. But I would say that the landscape with respect to what it's trying to protect against, which is homelessness and the spread of as it relates to the spread of COVID, I don't see, much as I'd like to be incredibly optimistic in that respect, I don't see that necessarily clearing up in the next, 40 days. So
Right.
It's certainly possible that moratorium or a third version comes into play. And so to that end, yeah, I think a notice of non-renewal is a good secondary or maybe primary arrow to have in your quiver in the current landscape. The problem that you're going to run into there is potentially exposing yourself to a claim that you basically dressed a wolf in sheep's clothing, and you're actually evicting for non-payment of rent. You're just calling it something different.
So would it be better to end a month-to-month lease, or would it be better to start making the claims for default with this moratorium?
I guess, can you clarify your question a little bit? I'm not maybe understanding exactly what you're asking.
So I have a tenant who's on month-to-month right now. She is behind on payments, but she's trying to make payments and all of that. We do have a water leak in her bathroom, so I was going to go ahead and end her lease at the end of the year. Give her the 30-day notice. Well, it'll be more than 30 days to end the lease. But she's also had, she's defaulted on different parts in the lease, like occupancy, the smoking, the candle burning. And I've told her verbally about them. I haven't actually done any written stuff on it. So would it be better to just end the lease or try to do the default? What would be a better option?
Yep. So I'm going to be a little bit artful in the manner in which I answer that. I am still a licensed attorney. I don't carry E&O in that respect. So I'm not.
This isn't legal advice, Brad?
It's not legal advice. I would tell you, though, I am sure that I have a tenant that fits that same fact pattern. So I'll tell you about that tenant. So if we have a tenant who is creating other non-payment violations, so in other words, breaching their lease terms that doesn't relate to the payment of rent. One, I wouldn't give, we always want to default to trying to be nice and be an agreeable sort and be, just good people. But I would never give a verbal anything. I mean, you may mention it if you're standing on the front porch and say, hey, I'd really like it if you didn't smoke in the house. But even then I'd follow that up with a written 7-day. And then I'd go do an inspection, give the requisite time to cure. Same with a hole in the wall, same with a broken window, whatever the case may be. And then I would go, and if the house still reeks of smoke and you're still seeing signs of that, I'd go ahead and hit with another 7-day. And then you've already put yourself into a legal position to evict for a qualified reason right now that's not related, that's not protected by the declaration. But with any month-to-month tenant right now, I would be giving that 30-day notice of non-renewal.
Okay.
To expire. The unfortunate part is right now, as we sit here today, a notice delivered right now is going to, their month-to-month tenancy is going to expire the same time that the moratorium is currently set to expire. But even still, you can get that process going a little more quickly in the beginning of January.
Okay, thank you.
We did have success with evicting a resident this year, the one that we did see through, and it was for a non-related, because we did get the affidavit, it was for a non-related payment. Sorry, it was not related to a payment issue, even though we had the payment issue. It was in their application. We found holes in their application that they submitted, which was a tangible document. So it was a heck of a lot easier to see that one through from that aspect. But we did have success avoiding the affidavit, even though it was served.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Ben. And what I would say, and just to give you an insight, if you're facing a similar situation, into my process, I mean, traditionally an eviction without the impact of COVID and different moratoriums, traditionally it's pretty straightforward. I mean, if you've done what you're supposed to do as a landlord and then it becomes, did you pay? No. Well, then here we are, right? So it's usually very straightforward. Now it's obviously there's some legal landmines to avoid. So what I'm getting at is when I'm going into any eviction since this second moratorium got put in place in the beginning of September, when I'm going into any eviction, I'm going in much more prepared on the history of the tenant and all of the justifications for where we are for, most likely it's a non-renewal or various violations not related to the payment of rent or whatever. So I can really very aggressively and strongly show why, even if like in Ben's situation with one of their tenants, there is a non-payment issue, so that I can very strongly justify that this is not a non-payment issue. This has A, B, C, D, and E, whatever else that we've given proper notice for.
Now, Brad, question, those non-payment issues, do those have to be items that are specifically stated in the lease, or can it be something that you just decided later, I don't want the tenant to do this, and they do it anyway, but it's not mentioned in the lease?
So
Was that clear? I don't know if I
are not
communicated
related to the payment of rent. Is that what you're asking? Is if an eviction is based upon a default that's not related to the payment of rent, and those default items are not listed in the lease?
Right, has nothing to do with rent, but it's things that are not mentioned in the lease, just the landlord just would rather the tenant didn't do those things.
Can you provide an example that may or may not apply to your current situation?
Sure. Let's say a tenant decides to install or replace a light fixture, and the lease says nothing about any of that, about a light fixture, but the tenant just says, I don't like the light fixture, so they install a new light fixture. But I say, I don't like this person, screwing around with electricity because they're not a qualified electrician.
Yep.
But then the lease doesn't mention any of that. Is that?
Yep. So there's a couple issues there. One, I would encourage anybody who is renting residential properties, one, to have a lease, two, to have your attorney review the lease, and three, make it as comprehensive as you possibly can. I'm sure Ben's lease is long. I know ours is long. I fall asleep reading it if I read it today, but it's everything in there is in there for a reason. One of those provisions is that there is absolutely no altering, amending anything of the property, no improvements, no nothing. without prior written authorization, carried out in the same formality that the lease itself is. So meaning if you want to install a light fixture in a house, we need to absolutely have a signed document that says that.
Okay, so if the lease doesn't say that, then that.
Right,
that
so
could-
short of that, what I would tell you there is Iowa law allows for you to basically amend or supplement your lease with reasonable rules, so long as you've given sufficient notice. I would tell you, having not done that and having not have, with it not specifically stated in the lease, probably a bit of an uphill battle. It might be hard to establish that the tenant knew or should have known that they were violating.
Okay, but the landlord can, like you say, amend the lease or maybe add that provision at any point in time, or or
with
only
notice.
upon-
With notice. So, and I'm sure you run into that, Ben, at times. I mean, where you've maybe you do, maybe you don't, but we we'll create rules. I actually I don't know, Ben, if you guys deal with that. I'd love to hear about it. But now that I think about it, the times that we run into that more are on small to mid-sized multifamily, where we've got some knuckleheads doing knucklehead things that aren't that are so knucklehead that we didn't necessarily specifically put it in the lease. So then we, you know, like whatever the example might be, but you know, then we'll, hey, this is prohibited, right? So
yeah, we've run into that on small multifamily as well, Brad. And our solution for that is a standing rules and regulations packet inside of our lease period that says that we can amend the rules and regulations with 30-day notice. So expand examples of knucklehead things. Hey, breaking into cars is not going to be tolerated. So if you break into someone else's car, that's a violation of lease moving forward. Or, hey guys, you got to get your trash all the way to the trash receptacles, not just in the hallway in a trash receptacle. Like, you know.
You run a tough show. Oh,
Now,
right?
Now, with that said, if someone does do something like breaking into cars, that's breaking the law. Is that a grounds for immediate eviction, or do you still need to go through the process, the 30-day process?
Still have to give notice.
There's a clear and present danger portion of the law that you potentially could bring into effect at that point in time. But yeah, I mean, like the trash one, for example, and most leases again have you must abide by the law and the ordinances of the location of the property, right? So whether that be a city of Des Moines ordinance or whether that be a state law or whatever the case, basically saying the laws that apply to everyone also apply to you and your tenancy at this property. So it's possible that breaking into cars could escalate to the level of clear and present danger. That's certainly the way I would try to handle it in that circumstance, which is an expedited measure as opposed to giving multiple 7-day notices and following through on that process, giving time to cure, and then, you know, so on.
And back to Brad's previous commentary from Brad, you always want to default to taking the nice guy approach. Well, we do. We take the nice guy approach. Hey, man, you know, the lease says you're not supposed to do this, so please stop doing that. Is a lot easier than calling a police officer to try to enforce some of these things. And if you can resolve those those issues without escalating it quite that far, you know, one of the most common ones that we had run into is people working on their vehicles in apartment parking lots, right? So then it looks like someone's breaking into a car or looks like something to that effect. So you just want to take the nice guy approach that says, hey, we're going to amend our rules and regulations because we weren't clear on that. But moving forward, you guys can't do that. Like, it's going to be a violation of lease. Please stop doing that. If I wanted to evict somebody, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'll say a little bit more. If I wanted to evict somebody, though, I would take the path of least resistance as well, according to the active law. So that would be a notice of non-renewal for the end of a lease that's coming up. Hey guys, we're just not going to extend this. It's not working out for whatever reason. We'll talk about the rents and all those past due things after you guys are out of there.
Yep. And you don't have to give a reason in a 30-day notice. So, that's all good. Before I started this company, I knew like 3 auto mechanics in town. Now I know 853, which was the 3 original ones plus the 850 tenants that we have. So
I love it.
We solve it very, very similar to both of how you guys are describing it. Number one is an amendment to the rules and regulations. That's an attachment to the lease. And then the second way is through renewals. Every time we renew a lease, there's a new addendum or amendment to that lease that gets added on and tacked on there. And then there's, of course, like you guys are saying, the knuckleheads, there's the one-off scenarios that you handle if you have to. But for the most part, ours get handled through kind of usually when we do it, we'll do it at scale as well. Because if it's one knucklehead, it's another knucklehead. So we might as well just across the board, bite the bullet, make it all happen and get it done. And then it's in our new renewal. So we never have to worry about it again.
Continuous improvement is what we like to call that.
There you
Find
go.
the knucklehead issues and solve it. I love it. Awesome. Well, we got some more questions here. There was a question that came in about written notice, email, text. Nick, I would say by default, yeah, you can email them, but I always get them served as well to make sure that they acknowledge it. Any opinion on that, Brad or Brent?
Yeah, I would always recommend, especially if it's one you don't want to renew. I mean, across the board, we do it, but we have to, or I feel like we should at scale, but mailed notice as well as certified, just to make sure that there's documentation that it's done. I mean, it costs you $3.50 or whatever it is. It doesn't hurt to do it. And of course you can do email and text and call, but I mean, if you have that tangible document and if you have the certification, you can go and you can say, look, we actually served this. Because if you mail it, even though that's technically all you have to do, where's your proof? If they say they didn't get it or whatever. So that would be my recommendation.
Agree completely. If you are ever doing something, and this goes back to Mitch's nice guy comment, I mean, we try to be understanding and cooperative and courteous individuals in the face of fire oftentimes. But if you're ever taking a step that you feel there's even a 5% chance that down the line you're going to want to be able to rely upon having taken that step, document it. And the only way to document it is to do what the law says. And I agree with Ben, although certified mail isn't required for every form of notice, it is a good abundance of caution step. It's a pain in the butt,
For sure.
but it's a good step in the direction of abundance of caution. Plus, then you shoot them a text and an email and say, hey, keep your eye on the mail, and here's and you send them an email that says, here's the notice that we're sending you. Now you've papered them to death, and you can say to the judge later on, I mean, do everything as though you expect to be standing in front of a judge on it someday. You can say, we gave as much notice as we possibly could. As soon as we became aware of this, we gave notice, and then we gave it in every way we could possibly imagine. It's gonna in over time and at scale, it's gonna lend itself to better results for your management of the properties.
For sure. Ben, question for you, brother. How has your staffing changed up? Has anything changed in the last 6 months as a result of COVID to service your tenant base?
Yeah, probably the opposite of what you would expect. We've hired 4 people during the pandemic, just because of growth. I struggle with this morally. What's bad for others a lot of times is good for us in our industry. So we experience great growth and expansion and retaining all of our team members. So only in good ways, honestly. And if you are looking to hire right now, well, I guess I haven't been in the pool here for the last couple of months, but when I was in June, July, May, June, and July, it was like an abundance of talent that was out there because of changes that were happening in the market and people getting let go. And so it seems like finding good help is not as difficult as it once was right now.
I would echo that on the office side. On the construction side, we're seeing the opposite.
Isn't that always the case, though?
Yeah, that's pretty consistent. What about from a management, like a property maintenance? Has that stayed the same? Have you had to add contractors inside of that? Are you seeing any ramifications directly because of COVID causing those scale ups or scale downs?
Well, the last time we got together, we had we were growing a large maintenance debt of stuff that just couldn't be done because, we were in the heat of COVID at the time, and tenants didn't want us in. We didn't want to be in. Our maintenance team didn't want to be in. All the above. Vendors didn't want to be in. We've pretty much exhausted that maintenance debt now. I mean, I think we're pretty much at a square even. I'm sure there's still outstanding stuff that just hasn't been submitted, but we did have to ramp up with some vendors to get stuff caught back up in a pretty quick way. We have some maintenance techs here, so we obviously kept as much in-house as we could to feed our family, but we did have to expand our vendor list a bit, and most of them were extremely receptive. The only challenge we faced in that was obviously the derecho was ridiculously difficult to, when you have 65 homes that are affected, it's hard to get somebody to get out of 65 homes in 24 hours or 48 hours because you're not the only one. I mean, Brad's trying to get people out there. We're trying to get people out there. And then all of you have your personal homes or your investment homes as well. So that was really difficult, but it was difficult across the board for everybody.
Yeah, that makes sense. Brad, any staffing changes, brother?
Yeah, we've hired some, just like Ben was saying, and then I would say our staffing emphasis, we've had to change some emphasis toward more time, pulling more staff and putting more staff time toward the collections process. I ran numbers earlier today. We collected, so let me think. Since April, we've collected 97.8% of all rents owed. And which I think is far better than what I expected. And then but we had to spend more time, and I'm sure Ben would echo this sentiment, more time on payment plans and babysitting those payment plans and being very somewhat aggressively lenient. So I would say we put more time into those things. And from a maintenance standpoint, I think we hit a little bit of a lull at the beginning of, like, let's say March, April, May. It seemed like we hit a little bit of a lull, which is also a natural time for us to hit a lull in maintenance too, because we're getting out of furnace season and not yet into AC season. But we hit a little bit of a lull there. And I think that was also because people were trying to figure out COVID and had bigger fish to fry than to call us about a leaky faucet and things like that. But I think we're caught up, very similar to what Ben said, and now just dealing with the stuff that comes in on a day-to-day basis, with probably the exception of tree removal, limb removal, things like that is still lingering a little bit from the derecho. So.
Sure.
I'll double down on what Brad said about staffing on the delinquency side. That's one of the full-time hires now that we had to make because it was such a huge load, and trying to divert it between like 3 people just for us didn't really work, because for May, June, July, I mean, pretty much every month, even now, we've had to be way more lenient. We have actual payment arrangements now that are signed and coordinated and facilitated, followed up. But I will say the last 45 days, so November and also October, we started to lean back into being a little hard and fast because we had habitual people that were, we got tired of seeing the same names. And so we had to kind of reshift back to pre-COVID mindset for a little bit and try to clear up some of those bad and just take the bad, see what happens, But it was Yeah, it's a lot of labor that goes into that. That's a 40-hour week easy.
Yeah.
That makes sense. When we talked last time, I think we all kind of echoed some incentives. Do you guys have any ongoing incentives for on-time payment or any programs that you've rolled out that you found beneficial? I know, Ben, you just mentioned payment plans that you guys have structured. Do you mind sharing kind of that setup or what your go-to is?
We don't have an incentive necessarily. Our incentive, I guess, is our proactive communication and working with somebody, trying to facilitate through it. It's been a few years since I ran across this, and Brad, maybe you can speak to this, but I thought there was something about giving incentives for on-time payments. I can't remember, though, that we weren't allowed to, or we had to be careful with what we were doing. But anyway, we've solved it for the most part just by proactive communication, constant communication. I mean, again, it's a person that is dedicated to collecting rents. So to answer your question, we don't have an incentive, but we have staffed a person to do it. That's kind of the incentive. And through communication, we tend to have success without having to dangle a carrot out there.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yep. And my response to that, we do have one big incentive that we've been offering, and that's if you pay your rent, you get to stay in your house. So we've been pushing that one hard. And but no, same as Ben, we take over some leases sometimes that give funky incentives for, like, if you pay before the first and things like that. On scale, we haven't found a good way to implement anything like that, because it just adds a whole bunch of work on the management side. It totally work if you've got your 4 or 5 or 6 units, but on our side of things at scale, it's incredibly hard to follow through on that. We are going to be rolling out an incentive program, but we're not going to be. It's more technologically based, so it's not something that we're going to have to babysit aggressively outside of pulling reports. But yeah, I would tell you it's the same thing that Ben's saying. I mean, we have 2 full-time individuals whose primary focus on a daily basis is rent collection, small balance collection, and handling those matters with, courtesy, understanding, and also being very realistic about the fact that this still needs to get paid. And by us encouraging you and helping you find, some assistance programs and educating you on those things, we're helping you dig yourself out of what's going to be a very bad hole and a big burst bubble that's going to come on January 1st. So
that makes sense. What are your owners' levels like? Do owners have anxiety? Are you seeing any shift in owner temperament?
We haven't. Well, back when we first talked, if I remember right, I kind of walked through the life cycle of it. When it first rolled out, it was, what the heck's going on? Panicking, freaking out. The second month was kind of coming to terms with what was going on and coming to reality of, okay, I might need to have some extra money set aside. And then by, I think it was May when we talked last, it was like things were, they were understanding, hey, I got to have a couple extra grand. I might have to make a couple rent payments here and there if a tenant doesn't pay. And I would just echo that's kind of continued more now, where most of our owners are just prepared and ready and understand that things are only going to get more difficult. And they're affected by COVID too, for the most part. They're having the same effects where when they see cases go up, they know that that's not good for their investment property. So they kind of already know what's coming. And on the incentive side, on the owners, I anticipated in the first part that we'd have to do something, even though we couldn't afford to, because it's how we get paid. I anticipated we'd have to do something to control our income, to be able to not have to let people go. But the exact opposite happened for the most part in all of our owners, where they're all like, I know that you're paid by us getting paid. So they were very, very gracious in that way. So I'm very surprised and relieved and grateful for our ownership group.
That's awesome. Awesome. Brad, anything to add to that, brother?
Same. I mean, as people have become a little more aware and maybe this isn't the right term, but desensitized to, or just, I don't know, familiar with COVID. I've noticed the same trend in the owners. I'm sure Ben was getting the same emails that I was when the first eviction moratorium was announced. And what does this mean? What are we going to do? Oh my gosh, whatever. And first month was a little hairy, second month, a little bit the same. And then they start to settle in and realize like it wasn't as bad as they thought, the sky is falling. And it wasn't as bad as we thought. And we've, weathered the storm pretty well. I'd be fine with the storm ending, but it hasn't been nearly as bad. And candidly, now we're seeing a lot more leads come in from, as far as new owners who don't yet have properties, but I've seen a significant uptick in those with folks looking to get into the market and start their investment portfolio. So
Awesome.
To me, that's a sign that that people are, coming out of the woodwork a little bit.
That's
the
awesome.
only thing
What
I can add to that, Mitch, that might be relevant is we're on our owner base feeling a lot of sensitivity to the election and what is 2021, 2022 going to look like as far as financing, prime, all the stuff that's going to affect that money that Brad's referencing that's calling in that wants to get in the game. Who knows? Interest rates are always a sensitive subject in that world. And so that's the only, I guess, kind of tentative owner base that's consistent every call. What's going to happen? And I don't know. Who knows?
If you find that crystal ball, let me know, please.
Yeah.
I will be on an island somewhere. I won't have to tell you. You'll never see me again.
It's reasonable.
Capital gains too. Owners are worried about capital gains.
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Any issues working with city through these, or any change from a renewal standpoint, from an inspection standpoint, anything like that?
Yeah, in the beginning, obviously they shut her down and everything pretty much seized up, and then it loosened back up. And I think it was yesterday or last Friday, I can't remember, but we got notice that Des Moines is now transitioning to video, FaceTime, Skype type inspections only. They won't actually come out and meet anymore unless it's a vacant property. I think they'll still do vacants. And I believe that West Des Moines, Urbandale, Clive self-inspections, Waukee are all trending towards closing her down because they don't have the scale that Des Moines has with all their inspectors. So they're just shutting her down, and we're going to have a backlog of city inspection stuff that's going to hit in first quarter of next year.
That's interesting from a tenant base. What's your thoughts on that, Brad?
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. Des Moines is embracing technology. Everybody else is at best in limbo, I would say, and kind of waiting to see what happens. But yeah, it's and we are seeing a lot of tenants, who don't want those inspections to occur, or don't want our general inspections to occur, saying that they have COVID. And it's by our notes in our system, it's like the fourth time that they've had COVID. But
no, wow,
that's frustrating for them.
But they need to eat an orange.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. What do you guys think? What comes next? Using your crystal ball, how do you feel with that backlog that you guys just talked about, with both the owner anxiety and the flood of folks coming into the market? What do you think happens inside the rental industry? Do we start seeing trends upwards, downwards, and or where do gaps start to be created? Any thoughts on that, guys?
I think we're going to see the market, a little bit of a market correction. I think we're going to see opportunity for those who have the capability to invest in those circumstances. I think we're going to see more product on the market at a better rate. You know, there's been some stuff that I've seen trade in Des Moines that, or in, you know, in the surrounding communities that I'm just, that I went and I did some underwriting for a client and took a look at it and thought that the price that it was being offered at was 20% off, 20% high, and then it went above list price. Things like that. I've seen that a number of times in the last 18, 24 months. Mitch, I'm sure you've seen that. Ben, I'm sure you've seen that. And so I think at some point the market's got to correct. And I think when it does, those that are ready for it will be in a good spot. I hope. I mean, we'll see.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm hopeful that Brad's right, but I tend to find myself saying that every year for the past 7 years.
I agree.
And the stinking demand is so high that even if we have a crappy economy or crappy market, because the demand is so high, it might falsely inflate the market for another year or two. I mean, it doesn't seem like the 2021 is going to be any slower at this point, with new construction sales being through the roof and resales being hard to come by. So I don't know. I tend to want to agree with Brad, but I hate to have this call a year from now and miss out on opportunity because we just thought it was going to be that year, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a real concern. We're getting so much pressure from outside of the state's borders. So and they're coming from markets that we would think that our market would never approximate that, but then 3 years ago, we didn't think it would approximate what it is now. So
we were doing some internal data here, trying to understand this crazy market, and was comparing to out in the Denver suburbs, Westminster, those areas out there where salaries are relatively comparable, 10, 15% higher, but real estate is legitimately 100% more expensive. This exact same floor plan will sell for $500,000 and it's $250 here. And so we actually did some boots on the ground, kind of like polling data, like asking how the heck, if your salary is only increased by 15%, but your housing increase is double the price, how do you afford it? One thing we discovered is that their property taxes are quite a bit lower than they are out here. But the other thing we discovered is we have like multi-generational housing happening, combined families, a really unique blend of stuff out there. But it gave me an insight to think, well, I don't know, but maybe that's where we're trending towards. If the prices keep going up like this because we're an attractive market to others, we might not get to that price, but maybe it's silly of us to think that that couldn't happen here. I mean, there's no indicator saying that it won't happen here, you know, other than our guts that we're all feeling.
If
That's interesting. The insider bias is a real thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're suggesting I have to live with my mother-in-law,
I'm sure
that's fair.
I'm sure there's Texas, Austin, right? They'll take you down there.
I'll move into a tent. I don't care.
That's funny. That's funny. I love it.
Wait,
So
this isn't live on Facebook, is it?
It might be. Yeah, it definitely is.
Oh,
You're in trouble. I got a finished basement, Brad. You can come stay if you need to.
just kidding, Sue.
We've got a couple open houses if you need them, brother.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. What's what kind of gaps you guys think are being created? Still largely single family tenant base that's searching, or is there anything else unique coming out? I can tell you from Texas right now, the number of Airbnbs, VRBOs has gone down substantially. And that definitely feels like a needed niche with us traveling, but I don't know.
Well, from my vantage point, and I'm sure Brad will be able to expand on mine and then maybe into another market as well, single family is still ridiculously strong. And the main reason why we feel it's so dang strong is equity or value opportunity with buying properties today, knowing they're going to appreciate 3% next year. It just is happening. That's a really strong market for us. And then also we're seeing, like, because of our niche, we have a hyper focus on new construction and watching those developments kind of work their way out. And if you get involved in an investment property on the early side of a new construction property, as long as the market holds, which we could say that every time we talked, those values, that same floor plan is selling. What started at 265 is now selling for 285. So not only did you gain the 3% appreciation, you also gained the instant equity because that floor plan is selling for 20K higher. So for us, single family still seems like a crazy awesome investment. I read in the Wall Street Journal the other day, there was a comparison between the S&P 500 and single family home investing. And right now, single family home returns are outpacing the S&P 500 over the last, I think it was 25 years or something like that. So indicators say single family strong. The tiny exposure I have to multifamily, which is not much, is it seems like there's so many players in the game and just like prices are just high. Numbers are hard to make work.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Yep. Agree completely. I agree with everything Ben just said. And the only thing I would add to it too is from single families are easy to market as rentals. They're unique. You have your own four walls, a floor and a ceiling. You don't have other people that you have to share space with, whether that be just a driveway or one wall and, you know, whatever the case may be. They're easier. I mean, there's a lot to be said for that. Even take, for example, like a row of townhomes. We all, you know, those of us that are located in central Iowa, you know, those things, those communities just pop up and they're everywhere. And you feel like you drove by last week and it was an empty field, and now you see 200 townhomes going up. And when you get to those levels, it starts to be a really commoditized experience from a prospective tenant's point of view. In other words, your townhouse, if you're renting, it has to be the lowest price one out of the 13 that are currently listed, or your phone's not going to ring until it is, because they're identical with maybe the exception of one being an end unit. And so in single family, it's unique. Maybe it's a cul-de-sac, maybe it's a quiet street, maybe it has neat trees, maybe it has a fantastic living room, or, you know, 300 square feet of finish in the basement, or pick your poison, a slightly bigger deck than every other 3-bed, 2-bath house in the neighborhood. But there starts to be something unique that makes single families very difficult to commoditize. Plus, like Ben said, we've got a fairly long track record and understanding of how these things appreciate over time. That's not as dependent on, you know, outside money coming into town and bidding up multifamilies and getting crazy aggressive with it. So I just think there's a whole lot of reasons that single families are just a good, strong, lasting, you know, a good performing investment. So,
would you guys say bigger or smaller on single families right now? If you were developing and picking inventory, would you want bigger houses or smaller houses, single family?
Well, I can give you a tiny little view. We were putting together some end of year data, trying to preliminary get this stuff put together so we can kind of look at a year in review. So from our vantage point of our portfolio of properties, and this is exact comparisons, Ames properties rent for $1,060 as a 2-bedroom. A 2-bedroom in Des Moines rents for $1,005. Ankeny, that same 2-bedroom rents for $1,067, and in West Des Moines, that same 2-bedroom rents for $1,231. 3 bedrooms rent in Ames for $1,464. In Des Moines, they rent for almost exactly the same, $1,463. Ankeny, they rent for $1,500 on the nose. West Des Moines, they rent for $1,515. And the big jump that we see is in the 4 beds. So a 4-bed in Ames rents for $1,837. A 4-bed in Des Moines rents for $1,679. In Ankeny, a 4-bed rents for $2,031. And on the west side, that rents for $2,230. So wow, you just see a huge gap for us between 3 and 4s. That's where the big jump happens to be. And West Des Moines, I mean, the west side, when I say west side, I mean like west of the interstate, Waukee, Clive, Urbandale. It's expensive out there, and most of the time about 7 to 10% more expensive, but you also see the returns if you invest out there. The rents are just high out there.
Interesting. That's a big gap on the 3 to 4s. That's more than I would have expected. That's interesting. Because I don't know. I'd love to pull data to compare those ratios against sale price, because I feel like that gap isn't as big when we look at the sale price comparisons.
It's definitely not when you're comparing new construction, because DR has just killed the 4-bedroom pricing. But the biggest I guess caveat I need to put in this is I am wrapping in the 3 bedrooms. You're going to see townhomes in there too, so that pulls rents down. Those 3-bedroom single families rent closer to like 1,800. So, but there is still a big price discrepancy between the two.
That's awesome. Interesting. So bigger is more dollars. Any square footage data on that by chance, Ben?
Yeah. So 17. The simplest answer is if you can get north of 1,700 with a 4-bed, you're in a really good spot. But we're renting a new construction 4-bed, 1,568 square foot, 2-story for 2,100. So
wow.
That's kind of like how is that possible type of number. But it's because there's 4 bedrooms up and families need those dang bedrooms. It's a 2-car garage too. I mean, it's nothing special. It's a super simple house. It's nuts. So if I had to pin it, it'd be that 4th bedroom. That's the key.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. Because it's not the square footage. We're not a very big 4-bed there. So that's awesome. Okay. Brad, any echo on that, brother?
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with what Ben's saying. And those figures are really compelling. And that would be kind of the last comment that Ben made about the 1,568 square foot house. Was that it, Ben?
Yeah, it's actually 1,468, but I wish it has another 100 square foot. Gotcha.
So, I mean, that's a 4-bed in those areas at that price point is going to get a ton of attention. So if you can do everything to get to that point, which is obviously find a lot that's in these good school districts and a desirable location and acquire that appropriately, and obviously have connections with or being a builder yourself and put that together, you do that all day, because you're going to get high quality tenants. You're going to pick your materials. You're going to have, wear resistant materials, and you're going to have a nice opportunity there. Probably, tough to find on the open market too, though. Would you say, Ben?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a daily grind, to find them. You got to cut to the source. You got to go to builders. It's not easy, but yeah. those properties, if you get in, we've got some investors who purchased, say, a new construction in Grimes, which is one of those fringe markets that's on the verge of blowing up. They bought for $262 in late 2019. That property, same thing, selling for $293 now. Absolutely insane. There's 2 other markets that, like the Grimes, Johnston, with the new, what do you want to call it, city site they're putting in Johnston, and then between 141, I think there's going to be a ton of opportunity that lies there with the flyover being done. And then the Bondurant, Altoona is kind of the obvious one, with Altoona or with Amazon throwing up that fulfillment, throwing 1,000 jobs out there, and the stair stepping at tax abatement they still have out there. And I'm speaking from the new construction word, so it's not meant for everybody, but man, it's hard to make them not cash flow. They cash flow pretty well.
And that's awesome. It's a great appreciation product, a great management product, a great a pride of ownership product. There's a lot of relationships that go into that opportunity too.
It takes capital too. Yeah. Like Brad was saying, it takes capital.
That makes a ton of sense. Awesome. Well, I think those are great pieces, guys. So try to wrap this up. I don't want to keep us too much longer. Ben, what are your top 3 pros and cons, knowing now what we know about COVID, for property management versus self-management? Any feedback you can give, good and bad, both ways.
Yeah, I mean, obviously pros, as Brad's going to echo, being the attorney in the group here, legal protection and just being on top of it. We used to do all of our own everything, and I've had to hire an attorney because I just can't keep up with the changes and making sure we're doing things right. So legal protection inside of these walls is obviously a huge thing. That's our job, to stay on top of that and up to speed as quickly as possible. Industry knowledge and know-how, just to try to give you those little tidbits, because winning's in the margins. That's where it's at. And then pushing the market rather than driving the market. I can say from experience, I think both of these companies, RPM Iowa and Renters Warehouse, both tend to drive the market rather than following the market, and other companies will look to what's posted out there through our sites or Zillow and see our numbers out there. And then cons, I mean, the obvious one, of course, we cost more. We're going to cost you something, but I don't want to combat all my negatives with a positive, so I won't do that. Cost, release and control, got to give us an opportunity to do our jobs and do it well for you. And then presumed, the bar is low in PM in the property management world. And so most people perceive you're going to get a certain level of service. I can attest to ours and also Brad's, just because I stay connected with Brad. These two companies, it's not what you expect it to be when you're looking at stuff. You're going to get something different.
Awesome. I appreciate it, brother. Brad, you want to close us down with some pros and cons, man?
You bet, buddy. Pros, I would say hands-free. I think that's important. I think it's important to most of the folks that we deal with. This isn't a full-time gig, and it's a portfolio option for them. It's a way to diversify their investment portfolio, and they don't have the time after an 8 to 5, a 7 to 5, whatever work schedule to really pour into this. Ben kind of touched on this, but just pitfalls, whether they be legal or otherwise. How do you draft a lease? How do you send notice? How do you start the eviction process? What are good qualifications for a tenant? I mean, I'm sure Ben deals with this, but there's 6 or 7 or 8 things that we tend to probably hear in every one of our new lead calls, that we can hit on these couple of points and show some proficiency and people know all of a sudden that, yeah, I didn't think about that at all. So and then the ability for you to as an investor to focus on the growth of your portfolio as opposed to leaky toilets and late rents. I mean, I think that's a massive pro, and it's something that both of our companies do. I mean, the idea is, get some expertise, let us take the reins and let us help you focus instead of on those kind of trivial day-to-day things. Focus on the bigger plan, which is, growing this into something that gives you some financial freedom sooner rather than later would be the hope. So as far as the cons, yeah, there's an additional expense to it. I would tell you that there's also a ton of savings associated with it. And I know Ben's services and our services, oftentimes with what we're able to save in maintenance and doing things right the first time and things like that, there's an offset, or getting more rent out of a property, things like that. But there is an additional expense. Having that trust, which I think speaks a little bit to kind of the perception market wide of what it is that we do and the level of service. The perception is that the level of service that's not provided, when in fact it is with certain companies like RPM and like Renters Warehouse. So I think having that trust is difficult for owners. And then a disconnect. There are some owners that maybe have done this on their own for, you know, the first few houses and things like that, and then it exceeds their bandwidth, you know, with their 9 to 5 included, and they're no longer hearing the stories of, you know, what happened with Mary, the tenant's daughter, and how she's getting along with her boyfriend and things like that, and they're not the ones twisting the wrench on the leaky faucet. And so they feel some level of a disconnect there, which is intentional and is productive, but sometimes it's hard to get to cross that barrier with them, and get them to see the upside of that. So
Awesome. I think those were all some pros and cons, guys. I just want to reiterate to everybody that property management seems like it's easy to do when everything is going well. But I think this last year, for anyone that's self-managing, probably articulated where the most value is coming from property management, from that con side, from that side that no one thinks about until it's put in front of them. And a good property management company definitely will add value to your properties, both in terms of mental freedom as well as overall revenue growth. So I definitely want to endorse both of these guys. If you guys have anything out there, if you're thinking about management, give Brad, give Ben a call, give both of these guys a call, figure out who works best for you. But definitely want to endorse these guys. Thank you guys so much for taking the time tonight to answer questions from us as well as the group. I really appreciate it. I haven't bugged you just one time now. I bugged you 2 times this year. So thank you, gentlemen, for taking that time.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
yeah,
I second
awesome.
that. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Ben.
yeah, our pleasure, guys. It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's fun to share insight and to hear everybody's thoughts, and it honestly, it sharpens our swords too, because we get to hear the questions that are out there, and you know, we're in the mix of this all day, every day, and so the things we think about aren't necessarily the same things you guys are thinking about, and so thank you for tuning in, and thanks, Mitch, for inviting us. It's enjoyable. So
Maybe we can do it next year in person. Doesn't have to be via Zoom, huh?
That'd be great. So we're hoping, I originally threw out there that we start regathering in January. Obviously, that is subject to political climate and or health of our state. But tentatively right now, we are still looking at January to meet. So fingers crossed on that. We'll keep everyone posted. But hopefully in January, we can start meeting in person again.